Hi everybody and welcome back to the Flicks the Church Forgot. My name is Peter Laws. This is the second in a multi-part episode which looks at the Stephen King movie Pet Sematary. There's a great upcoming feature-length documentary about that film called Unearthed and Untold. If you'd like my review of that, then check out episode 1 of this series. But tonight, I'm going to be spending my time looking more into the film itself and the novel so that we might discuss the deeper themes that Pet Sematary explores. Now, if for some of you out there may not know what Pet Sematary is, it's a 1989 film based on the novel by Stephen King, which tells the tale of a young doctor called Lewis Creed who moves into a house just down the path from a very creepy, but kind of cutesy, Pet Sematary for local kids to bury their beloved animals in. Only it's sited right next to an ancient Indian burial ground, which happens to have the power to resurrect the dead. And Lewis discovers that in time, the temptation to actually try that ground out becomes a little bit too hard to resist. Now bear in mind that as we discuss the film, I'm going to be sharing some spoilers, some major spoilers of it, so if you haven't seen the film yet, I suggest you watch it first. But it is difficult to discuss a film like this and its themes without giving away some of the key plot points. But to start with, here's a 1989 TV spot for the movie. I would use the official trailer, but ironically it contains Lalo Schifrin's music from the Amityville Horror, which I just know YouTube algorithms are going to pick up, and I'll end up getting a message saying that I'm breaching copyright for using it. That has happened before when I've used trailers, hence why I'm featuring trailers less and less these days. Hope that explains it for you. But anyway, here's the Pet Sematary TV spot, which admittedly makes the film look like a pretty throwaway TV movie, but believe me, it's not. It's more than that.
May the Lord bless you and keep you.
Has anyone ever buried a person up there?
Daddy's gonna do something really bad.
Sometimes that is better.
If it doesn't work, I'll just put him back.
Stephen King's Pet Sematary, rated R. Starts Friday, April 21st at theaters everywhere.
Despite what that trailer might suggest, there was something not only frightening about the film Pet Sematary, but also something that was emotionally draining about it. It were characteristics that really made it stand out from the horror field at the time. The film came out, as I've said, in 1989. It hit UK home video in the November of that year, and to be fair, seeing it on the shelf didn't really prompt a great deal of excitement. The CIC cover art was pretty basic and uninspiring. And this was a year, what you have to understand, when a lot of horror movies were just sort of a bit tedious. 89 did have some good ones there. Brian Yuzna Society, which was a very different kind of movie. Also Intruder, which was a fresh and energetic take on the slasher genre. But on the whole, 1989 was a year of Amityville 4, The Evil Escapes, Chud 2, Bud the Chud, and Jason Takes Manhattan. Films that in their own way were fun and cartoony and light, but not particularly threatening or disturbing. And so to anybody in the video store, Pet Sematary and the UK cover art in particular would have seen that and been at risk of blending it in with all the other bland horrors of that year. Except, I suppose, one thing that potentially made it stand out. At least it was, in fact, a Stephen King film with his name emblazoned across the front. Yet even that might have not given horror audiences a great deal of confidence at that time. The 80s had seen a deluge of Stephen King movies, and in the years leading up to 89, he'd had a string of films that were alright, but they felt more cozy than scary. Silver Bullet, Creepshow 2, A Return to Salem's Lot, Stand By Me. Some of these films I actually quite like, particularly Silver Bullet. I've always had a soft spot for that. But Stephen King horror movies were at the time being accused of becoming a little bit too vanilla to really frighten. So I read Pet Sematary and I slotted in, and it did something that not many films did around the time. It actually really genuinely frightened me, and it was scary but also disturbed me. And more than that, it stayed with me emotionally. It sort of buried itself into my subconscious, and I suppose has never really left it. Does that mean Pet Sematary is a perfect movie? No, it's not. Are there flaws in it? Yes, there is. But does it press the right horror buttons in the audience? Well, it did me, and judging by the Unearthed and Untold documentary, it did the same thing for many, many other people. In fact, the film ended up being a big hit. So now, as I get onto the deeper themes of Pet Sematary in a moment, we'll just say some things that work for me about the film. For a start, I think it's a very efficient story with a brilliantly logical structure. Stephen King has a habit of doing this, of coming up with a story idea that can pretty much be explained in one sentence. And it's all you need to know the plot. Telekinetic girl gets bullied, takes revenge. Woman and son trapped in a car by a rabid dog. Man finds reanimating cemetery, tries it out. These are not convoluted story ideas, and so Pet Sematary has this great logic. And how it moves and what it does indeed has a great logic about it. The documentary Unearthed and Untold points out that King based the story on The Monkey's Paw. If you've never read that, you should try it. I first read The Monkey's Paw in some sort of spooky tales library book when I was a kid, and it really freaked me out because it's a masterclass of story structure. Basically, a couple are given a shriveled monkey's paw that can grant wishes, and they try it with horrendous and graveyard disturbing consequences. Pet Sematary really does have that similar sense of a man playing with forces that he lacks the wisdom to control, but also it's like that story, it's slotted into a pleasing structure where one decision leads to another, and then to another, and then to another. It's cool that way. But of course, what makes the film really stand out from others at the time is, I think, the influence of the director, and in this case she was called Mary Lambert. At the time, she had directed an award-winning erotic thriller called Siesta and a bunch of music videos, and the music videos are an important clue to her style, in that music videos often rely on symbolism and imagery to accentuate the music, tell a story. She made videos for Madonna like a Virgin, a Material Girl, and Like a Prayer, the controversial video. These were really iconic early music videos. So anyway, she hasn't done a great deal since then. She did direct Mega Python vs. Gatorade a few years back, but in this, she takes King's script and gives it a wonderful and chilling visual flair. For example, one of the cool things is like when Gage comes back from the dead, if you've seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about. He's wearing some very strange funeral clothes, like the baby son of some odd Victorian aristocrat. And it looks crazy and even laughable until you watch it back and see an earlier scene where Rachel Creed discusses her terror at having to deal with her bedridden sister Zelda, who was suffering from crippling spinal meningitis. And you spot that the painting in Zelda's house, in Rachel's old house, is dressed exactly like Gage will be dressed after death, which is really quite strange and unnerving. And not only that, this prophetic little painting also has the cat in it too, though the face looks a bit more like a monkey to me. This portent of things to come is just something Lambert throws in there. Plus, there's also the issue of the face of this child in the painting. Some internet theorists say that this is Zelda as a child before she got the crippling disease, so that basically when Gage comes back from the dead, it's actually the spirit of Zelda who has returned from the grave to get Rachel, which was always her worst fear as a child. That's a pretty creepy idea, although it's hard to imagine that face on the painting is that of Zelda as a kid. Another theory is suggested by a Reddit user called PROX1MO, Proximo, or something like that. And then you say that basically the face in the painting looks a bit like the old woman who sits next to Rachel on the plane in one of the final scenes. Is this the face of something that is coming for her, that is surrounding her in every day, that was even in her childhood home watching her, that has sat with her on journeys all of her life and is coming from the grave to collect her? Spooky. But the fact that Lambert throws all these little details in is a good example of her creativity and her love of symbolism and foreshadowing. She does the same again actually with Gage's coffin, and when it gets knocked to the ground in a scuffle at a funeral, which is perhaps one of the most devastating scenes of the film. And we see Gage's coffin, open a touch and the hand rise up and drop, which of course is exactly what is going to happen soon enough. That coffin will not stay shut, and that hand will definitely not stay down. It will lift again. So Lambert was perhaps a risky choice for the studio to take, but I do think that she really does deliver with the film. Another great touch is the music by Elliot Goldenthal. His soundtrack to Pet Sematary sometimes gets unfairly compared to Schifrin's work on the Amityville Horror. As I said, the trailer even uses it. Two horror scores that have sing-song children's choir in them. But the score to Pet Sematary isn't just like a rip-off score at all. It stands on its own with some very frightening writing for strings. Goldenthal had a background in avant-garde music, and he'd write stuff that was both beautiful and primitive and wild. That's what happens here in Pet Sematary. There's some like furious violin playing that really slaps the viewer in the face. You're like, whoa, hang on, that's a bit intense. And yes, there's some Bernard Herrmann style psycho music in this as well. But let's not tell Goldenthal off for that. It's not like Bernard Herrmann, as brilliant as he is, has the intellectual property rights on violently played strings. That's just a technique that we can use. I had the Pet Sematary soundtrack on trusty audio cassette back in the day, and it used to be one of the most popular albums to play when me and my friends would go on ghost hunts at night. By the way, in 2013, it came out in a really excellent expanded edition from La La Land Records, so check that out. Fred Gwynne as the kindly old man Judd is actually really good in this, and I like how in the documentary we learn that he saw that this film was not just a bleak exploitation movie, but also something important about grief and how we deal with it. This is poignant because in 1963 his son Dylan tragically drowned in the family pool, which of course devastated him and threw him into a depression. Interestingly, it was in the following year that Gwynne was to step into horror, as it were, where he played a friendly monster in a new show called The Munsters. But yes, he does add something pretty special to this film. I also really love the flashback scenes in Pet Sematary. Sometimes flashbacks in movies can be so lame and they take you out of the story, but these ones add to a sense of threat and mythology all around the Pet Sematary. So, the film itself, Pet Sematary, isn't perfect. For example, some of the acting from the two leads, to me, feels a little bit stilted. Not always, but sometimes. I guess I can appreciate some people are a big fan of Victor Pascal, the character, the zombie who wanders around in his shorts chatting to Creed about the burial grounds, and he does a very good job with it. And it's appropriately creepy, but I did sometimes feel like the Pascal character wasn't really essential to the story. In the novel it was great because there was plenty of time, but I don't know, it reminded me a little bit too much of Griffin Dunn's character in American Werewolf in London, the walking corpse that turns up to explain the rules of lycanthropy and werewolf lore. For a film that is so good at efficient story structure, I did wonder sometimes if it would have worked just as well without that. However, I appreciate that's controversial because there's people out there who adore Pascal's character, and it certainly injects spook and gore early in the film, which I guess would be lacking without it. So, I'm in two minds about it. So yeah, the film isn't perfect. However, I get totally baffled by how badly the film was received by some critics at the time. The Washington Post called Pet Sematary bland, cliched, and cheap. Even at one point in that review called it inept. I didn't agree with that review, but I did like the last line of the Washington Post review, which said, "Sometimes read is better." Basically, don't see the film, read the book. I didn't agree with it, but it was still a clever line. Variety said Pet Sematary was undead schlock, dulled by a slasher film mentality. And I suppose what strikes some viewers is the film doesn't just employ gothic spookiness, but it does also throw in a whole bunch of grotesque, exploitative violence. For me, that is in some ways what makes Pet Sematary so memorable, that it's relentless in its theme. The focus of this film, the subject it wants to explore, is death. And it's the deeper themes of Pet Sematary that we'll return to in the next episode. But for now, please share and subscribe and follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws. Or you can read my column in the Fortune Times magazine. And don't forget the flicks the church forgot.